Bush's top spokesperson, Karen Hughes.
Karen Hughes that morning reached out to people to try to figure out how to handle it.
I don't.
But here they were in the middle, here all this else was going on, and they get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning that Dick Cheney's in the hospital.
In the coronary care unit, another set of EKGs was basically undertaken. One of these EKGs showed a little squiggle that showed what we in the trade call ST depression. That's a change, a lowering of one of the waves on the EKG that says this person may be suffering a heart attack. But as doctors, to stop the chest pain and to prevent any further damage to his heart, then put a balloon catheter into this blockage. They jam it in there, they open the balloon up, open up the blockage. But so that blockage wouldn't close down again, they used what's called a stent. It's a wire mesh device that then opens up like this and basically keeps that artery open. They pulled it back out. It was a very successful procedure.
This morning I talked to Secretary Cheney. We had a very good conversation. He sounded really strong, and he informed me that as a precautionary measure, he went into the hospital. He was feeling chest pains, and turns out the subsequent tests, blood tests, and the initial EKG showed that he had no heart attack. I'm pleased to report that.
It wasn't until 2:30 that there was this first press conference by hospital officials, and Dr. Wasserman said neither his initial EKG nor his blood work indicated that he had a heart attack. That was the same statement that came out from the Bush campaign. I immediately read that statement and saw the word initial. What do you mean there was the initial EKG and the initial blood work showed no heart attack? What about the other EKGs? What about the other blood work? And then all of a sudden, no more questions.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, doctors.
Is there any more procedures today, like radiation?
Are there any other procedures he has to go through?
As I told you, we will be keeping, this is the only briefing today.
I was told by Bush Cheney people, there will be no more developments today. There will be no more press conferences. You will get no more news. And then all of a sudden, we're going to have a press conference.
We got word that there would be another press conference. Our antenna went up, and we said the likelihood is that he's had a heart attack after all.
And the doctors said there was a heart attack.
Wasn't your previous statement misleading?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't your previous statement misleading? It led with a sentence that said he didn't have a heart attack, and then...
I'm sorry, I don't remember ever saying he didn't have a heart attack.
The press was livid.
By his doctors that he was assured he didn't have a heart attack. And now you're telling us he had heart attacks.
Let me clarify.
Screaming, the tone of voice between the press and the doctors was unbelievable.
1 year ago, this would not have qualified as a heart attack according to the American Heart Association. What's changed in the last year is that there are much more specific blood tests that can detect the very tiniest traces of damage to heart muscle.
This was a particularly difficult thing, I think, for the Bush people, because Dick Cheney has been sort of the one stolid, reliable, experienced Washington hand. He's done 5 transitions, he knows what he's doing, and he's just gotten better and better and better throughout this process. So for him to be set back with, you know, a potentially serious health problem, which fortunately it turns out not to have been, but to be answering these questions was a very dramatic and troubling day.
The drama of the day was not limited to Cheney's heart attack and medical care in Washington. In Florida, the Bush team got its first big break in the recount effort driven by the Gore team. Miami-Dade, facing a Sunday, November 26th deadline to conclude its manual recount of votes, decided to stop counting.
The Gore team felt like the rug had been pulled out from under them. They were absolutely thunderstruck when Miami-Dade stopped its recount. They were bitterly disappointed, very angry, and looking around to try to figure out who to blame.
And the finger was quickly pointed at Republicans. Gore supporters accused Republican demonstrators of intimidating the board by demonstrating loudly outside the offices where the ballots were being counted. It was later reported that many of the protesters were not even from Florida.
staffers from Washington, from Capitol Hill, from the office of the Majority Whip, Tom DeLay, known as the Hammer, who had been flown down to Miami to create protest, havoc, all sorts of trouble, to make it look like Florida was a mess, a nightmare.
On Thanksgiving Day, Gore team lawyers led by David Boies filed an emergency appeal to the Florida Supreme Court for an order to restart the counting in Miami-Dade. The court said no.
And the writ is denied without prejudice to any party raising any issue presented in the writ in any future proceeding. No motion for rehearing will be allowed.
The Sunday deadline, when Katherine Harris would certify the votes, continued to loom large for both sides. And unlike Miami-Dade, Palm Beach and Broward continued to count. But would they make it?
10 minutes to 2, we're starting on time, hopefully.
When we come back, the very public, very controversial ballot counting in Florida.
Both sides felt that the other side really was cheating, that somehow they were trying to do something that was fundamentally wrong, that what they were doing was trying to steal this election. It was a totally partisan exercise.
With Miami-Dade's recount stopped dead in its tracks, the Democrats and Republicans focused on Broward and Palm Beach. If Al Gore could not pick up votes in these two counties, the race would be over. The Florida Supreme Court had overruled Katherine Harris and given the counties more time, but it had not given them clear guidelines on which ballots count and which do not. That was a crucial issue that would haunt the men and women charged with counting those ballots under the watchful eyes of the entire country.
The initial deadline, of course, was 7 days. And Katherine Harris wasn't going to budge from that 7 days after the election. You've got to have your votes in. That was an impossibility. And when the Supreme Court intervened and gave us a new deadline, we were certainly confident we could make it.
Please be seated.
The crucial votes were the undervotes, the ones that the machine hadn't registered to vote for president.
Undervote.
There were a couple differences between Palm Beach and Broward. First of all, the standards were different.
Broward was using the most liberal standard. You know, dimpled chads, those kinds of things were counted.
You've told these lawyers to go bring you more votes. And I assume we're going to keep bringing them to you until such time as you've got 1,000 votes. And I think that's what you're looking for.
All right, Mr. Scherer, you're out of line.
Okay?
Okay? And we'll go ahead and recess. I'll ask the deputies to clear the courtroom, and Mr. Scherer is not welcome back in this room. He can watch the proceedings from outside.
Palm Beach, actually, it turned out that they were using a fairly restrictive standard.
We're looking at the overall ballot card. We've seen a lot with multiple impressions. We've counted those as votes. We've seen a lot with one impression. We're not counting as votes. Because, you know, I just think we're trying to be consistent and trying to find the voters' intent. Undervote.
The Democrats were unhappy about that, and in fact, that is still part of, and was still part of their lawsuit up until the very end, that they didn't think the standard in Palm Beach County was fair.
There is a clear dent on the chads, and the commission has been consistently ruling them, but they've been ruling them as undervotes. Objection. We think that standard is wrong.
The Democratic spin is that we're not considering. The Republican spin is that we're a bunch of idiots who don't know how to do this.
The chads are falling where they may in there. We've got pregnant chads falling out. We've got hands roughly running across these fragile paper ballots.
Again, I think that's unfair to a lot of hard-working people who are doing this.
Both sides felt that the other side really was cheating, that somehow they were trying to do something that was fundamentally wrong, that what they were doing was trying to steal this election. It was a totally partisan exercise, often an angry partisan exercise.
The difficulty is Florida law has no standard other than the clear intent of the voter shall be given effect. So the problem is trying to determine what that intent is and how you're going to read these ballots. 18.
Charles Burton was able to deal with the situation in a way that he brought a lot of humor to this, because there were a lot of times where it was stressful inside of that building.
Even you couldn't object to that. We will. But you will. Republican objector.
It was stressful outside of the building with all these protesters and these cameras.
Is it true that you and Carol Roberts are having an affair? I think Howard Stern's waiting over there for you. Why don't you go see?
And he had like the most bizarre ballot of the day, and that was his way of kind of making everybody kind of laugh at it. Like,
You gotta get, I gotta take him. You gotta get a close up of this. This is just worth a look. I think that was a bingo card or something.
There's no doubt that it was a strategy involved by the Republican Party to complain in public that this was taking way too long, while at the same time forcing it to take a long time.
We have repeatedly raised the objection to the canvassing board that the pace is too fast and it is not being conducted in a thoughtful way. We've asked them to slow down and not to have too many tasks going on at one time.
These were people who were honest election officials and volunteers who'd come in. It was handled very well, and there was no chaos inside the room. It was quiet. You could hear a pin drop.
You could hear a Chad drop. It got so quiet.
In every case that I observed, all of these boards tried to keep this thing as open as possible.
The one thing we've all been concerned about in this is, number one, keeping it open, keeping it public. It's the only way the public's going to have confidence in what we're doing.
I got to Palm Beach in the last day or two when it was starting to become clear that the deadline there was going to be a big, big problem for them.
I think we're going to take off Thanksgiving. I think we're looking good enough that we can all get a day off, and this is day number 15 in a row for me, so I'm really going to enjoy it.
there were definitely regrets. I mean, Charles Burton said it himself, second guessing, should they have taken Thanksgiving off?
There were other delays besides Thanksgiving Day off. There was a court hearing. And Judge Burton was a patient, kind of long-suffering guy who listened and let both sides talk a lot.
Some indication of something there, as well as clearly punched holes.
But
So I'm trying to consider the totality of this ballot card, actually, yeah.
What struck me was on that final weekend, before the Supreme Court's deadline to certify the vote, that they still seemed to be moving along at a pace which really left a lot of doubt as to whether or not they were going to make it.
So when we get to the last night, we're racing, and we decide to try and go around the clock.
They were doing Gore, 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 Bush, 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 no vote, undervote, overvote.
I think about probably 1 o'clock or so that last day, Sunday, we realized we're not going to make it, and decided to send a letter to the Secretary of State. Your consideration of our request to extend the deadline for final submission of this hand count until Monday, November 27th at 9 o'clock a.m. would be greatly appreciated. As we know, you are interested in counting all votes as accurately as possible.
I wish that we could have waited to have their hand recount brought in, but the law said if our offices are open on Sunday night, the Supreme Court said then you will certify that night at 5 o'clock. But the Florida Supreme Court gave us no leeway.
It was clear from the beginning that she didn't want to give them that much time in the first place.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the State Elections Canvassing Commission, we are here today to certify the results of the election that occurred November 7th, 2000.
They knew it was done. I mean, they had spent 12 days and counted 360,000 ballots, and it was over. It didn't mean anything, and you could see it on their faces. I mean, that was a tough 12 days.
I hereby declare Governor George W. Bush the winner of Florida's 25 electoral votes for the President of the United States.
What's your impression of Secretary Harris as a result of this decision and this exercise of her discretion?
Next question. As you know, we basically needed about another 2 hours, and we could have finished it off. So I think, you know, in many ways it was a slap in the face to all those people. You know, who knows what really would have happened had everybody been able to vote as they intended to vote. You know, the problem is, you know, mistakes happen, people get confused, people punch out more than one candidate, people don't punch out any candidate. It's hard to tell.
When we come back, the presidential election moves into new territory, the Supreme Court of the United States.
I think outside the courtroom, the feeling was it's the Republicans and the Democrats. It's Bush versus Gore. It's tense. It's showdown. It's smackdown.